What did the pandemic ruin more than we realize? Story 1. My sense of time. I'm at a point now where I'll be thinking of something from a couple of months ago, and then I'll be corrected that it actually happened nearly 3 years ago. I was thinking about this the other day. Everything that happened around 2019 still has a 1 year ago feeling. I remember in 2019 I quit my first real adult job of 5 years. I was spurred to do this because one day I looked at a decade's calendar and realized I had been at that job for longer than I had been in college, the army, and any other job combined, and had seen no real personal advancement. This was a tremendous psychological shock. Today it seems like literally last month I was looking at that calendar and doing those calculations and wondering how I had tolerated those conditions for so long. For real. My fiance and I met during the early days of COVID and got engaged at the end of last year. I love my fiance so much and I can't wait to marry him, but it's so weird to be getting married because I often feel like we just had our first date a few months ago. We have been together for about 4 years now, and this has been my longest relationship to date. I was only with my ex for 3 years, but it seems like I was with him longer. It's so strange. While I agree, the pandemic also changed my sense of time slightly. Getting older does this, and I was feeling it before the pandemic. The older you get, the less you feel time moving. When you are 10 years old, a year is 1/10 of your life, and for most of that, you weren't fully conscious. At 50, a year feels like nothing. I think it also has to do with your life and what you do. When you are young, there are well-defined time periods. Middle school, high school, college, and early career. Lots of moving in and out of apartments and relationships. When most people get older, their career stabilizes and they stay put in a house for longer. Story 2. A lot of smaller businesses completely died because of it. The year before, I considered opening a little pizza restaurant and venue bar. I did a lot of work selling pizzas and putting on shows as events in other venues. I asked around, should I open my pizza place or buy a home? Everyone said to buy a home, so my wife and I did. But I was a little disappointed having not started my pizza restaurant. Then, COVID hit. Ended up being a godsend. So lucky. The rest of my life would have been ruined. There's an underground mall where I live that's a bit of a time capsule of sorts from the 1970s. The business had somehow thrived there for 50 years, closing down this year. No one works in the office anymore, and those that do usually don't 100%. These businesses can't stay alive, so all of the last of them are closing later this year. Kind of the end of an era. It's maddening that giant corporations got so much money, but small businesses got nothing. That said, many qualified, just didn't apply for PPP loans. Our store could have gotten enough to pay all our wages for a year, but the boss decided he could weather the storm. Luckily, he was right, after he had to close one of our 2 locations. I know several other businesses that made the same call and shuttered completely. Meanwhile, I know more about a couple that got by completely on PPP loans, reopened, and then got the majority of the loan forgiven. Yup, 2 weeks to flatten the curve turned into over a year of nobody driving anywhere. My clients didn't need my services, so my auto repair business of 22 years went bankrupt, and I sold my house of 34 years in the process. Now I live off-grid in a 36-year-old motorhome on a cheap plot of land in the remote Mojave Desert. Even more infuriating is the way situations like this get hidden from the public. In YouTube, comments, COVID bankrupted, COVID destroyed, lockdowns bankrupted, etc. get shadow banned automatically, so nobody gets to hear stories like mine. Small town resident reporting, my community has been utterly gutted. Local institutions that have been around for generations, region-defining places that were a big part of making our way of life pleasant are just straight gone. They were already struggling in this era of big box, anti-competitive free market, as if commerce. But the pandemic just straight flipped the table on them. And because of said big box stranglehold on the company, it's not like anything new is going to rise to fill that space. No one, absolutely no one, can compete with the economies of scale the Walmarts and Amazons of the modern world are able to leverage. This is feudalism reborn. We need personal and institutional wealth caps. If these dirty sons of bitches won't allow competition, then we need to cap them artificially. Story 3. a lot of people's basic manners. I was a flight attendant during the pandemic, and I quit because 3 years ago now, someone tried to strangle my crew and me to death over the fact that we ran out of sandwiches on a flight. Before that incident, I had people spit on me, try to trip me in the aisles, hit me, call me every single name in the book, and then some over-the-whole mask thing. According to my friends still flying, it hasn't gotten any better at all. People have lost their damn minds. Though because of the COVID conspiracy BS that went around, the anti-woke crap, and the inability to just look after each other by exercising some common decency, my ability to give people the benefit of the doubt severely diminished and may never recover. When I'm in public, I feel a lot more confrontational than I ever was before. I've started to notice this a lot in games I play, miniature wargaming and now TCG. You really feel like it's your job to make sure the opponent doesn't get upset, salty, or angry during a tournament game. Just was at a big Star Wars Unlimited event and even a buddy noticed first. Just feel like you're walking on eggshells to ask someone to follow a minor rule properly. It's awful if you have to ask at the start of a game now because they're irritated all match if you win and they're salty. You can get up and leave. My theory is that people getting less contact with others then have less oxytocin, which is what makes us feel connected to others and builds our sense of empathy and community. So all the people who stopped seeing people as much in 2020 and never went back to having nearly as much human interaction are now going through life with significantly less empathy and much less of a sense that other people are part of their community. I was driving in my car and a guy pulled up alongside me and started blaring his horn at me. So I pull over and roll down my windows. The guy rolls down his windows and screams at me, "Put your freaking mask on!" I'm in my own car with my windows rolled up. Why do you care? The same thing happened a month later when I was in a park and no one was around. Some guy ran across a huge field to tell me to put my freaking mask on, explaining to the gentleman that UV light kills COVID in seconds and was far safer on the other side of the field than anywhere near me went on deaf ears. When I went into a building or near people, I put a mask on. When I'm out and about and alone or in my car, there's no need. The same crap happened the other way around too. I'm in the grocery store and some guy refuses to put a mask on. Employee goes to ask him to put it on and he proceeds to fake cough all over the guy and say, "I'm sorry, did you say something?" Story 4. Availability. I'm a night owl and used to go to the grocery shop at 2 a.m. just by myself in my headphones. It was glorious. I live in New York, and even here, stores and restaurants, takeout places, close ludicrously early compared to before the pandemic. I'm talking at 9 or 10 p.m. on a Saturday in New York. It used to be that I could go out with friends and come back to my neighborhood after midnight and grab something to eat on the way back home. Now I'm lucky if 2 places are even open, and often I just have to hope I've got something in the fridge. Not a tragedy, just annoying. Retail used the pandemic to recalibrate cost/profit. Things like low-margin loss leaders and 24-hour shopping were created in periods of intense competition to win customers. The pandemic just reset everything and proved McDonald's can make just as much or more money selling 5 $10 Big Macs as they could have selling 20 for $4, assuming it costs $2 to make here. I don't live in a huge town, but the Triad area around me has close to 1 million people. Everything here started being 24 hours about 2010. Walmart, McDonald's, grocery stores, basically every gas station and pharmacy. The pandemic hit and now the latest, most places will stay open until 10 or 11 if you're lucky. It's like living in 1999 again. And it's a blue code state, so on Sundays a lot of places close at 8. BS if you ask me, but they don't pay great wages. So I get it, but damn, I miss hitting up the store at like 2 or 3 a.m. and being the only person in the store. It was truly a time to be alive. I live in a student town, and a lot of the coffee places used to be open till 11, and college kids would come drink coffee and do homework. Now the latest the local places are open is 8, and Starbucks and whatnot are open until 9. I've got kids, so I liked that I could spend time with them and go do homework. as a non-traditional college student, or read once they were in bed. The grocery store by me used to be open 24 hours, but now it's closed at 10 and opens at 8. The Taco Bell right down the road used to be open till 2, but now it's only open until 11. Even McDonald's closes at 10 by now, used to at least be midnight. I'm not saying I'll starve, but I get off work at 10, sometimes later, and I used to really enjoy shopping late, or on stressful days grabbing easy junk food on the way home. I don't want to start bringing out pans and stuff to cook something at 10 p.m., but reheating leftovers or putting in frozen pizza just isn't the same. Story 5. The education and mental well-being of those currently in high school or lower. It's slowly getting better. My husband is a middle school teacher. His first 2 classes after COVID had basically forgotten how to do school and were a tiny bit feral. I have friends who are educators and they say the same thing. You can tell by their age which sorts of skills they are lacking in, and it's mostly social things that we learned at the age when COVID hit. Like 4th graders are lacking in skills that kindergarten should have taught, or high school kids who seem to be stuck in middle school thinking. Even if they academically are bright and have caught up with the coursework, they are socially stunted for like 2 years. I've noticed a friend's kid who was looking forward to an amazing senior year of high school and freshman year of college, who has all of that taken away by COVID. No prom, graduation, starting college online, and never really making friends as an incoming freshman normally would. They have been just kinda in this weird limbo since it was such a transition period that was blocked and there just wasn't a final resolution to high school. They really seem like a shell of their former vibrant selves. I'm hoping when they continue their education, they can do it right this time and come back to life. It's quite sad, actually. I think the younger people were a bit more malleable, so they could come out of their funk, but having it hit as a teenager who's trying to figure themselves out really seemed to suck. My kids seem to be doing great academically and socially, but one funny thing that I noticed is that my middle daughter, who's in the 5th grade, writes like a 2nd grader. She did the end of 1st grade and all of 2nd online, so she missed a lot of handwriting development. On the bright side, her computer skills were way ahead of where they would have been normally, and she's starting to get into things like coding. After reading some of these comments, I totally get it too. I work with kids after school, grades K through 4, and some of the older kids certainly seem younger socially. I didn't correlate that to the pandemic before. One kid who's in grade 3 spends most of his time playing with a couple of kindergartners and tends to act out when something doesn't go his way when playing with kids closer to his age. Could also be an only child thing, not too sure. He also can't read in English very well. These kids go to a French immersion school. And the grade 4 kid, her handwriting also isn't very developed. When I think back to how I was at that age, my writing wasn't the best, but I feel like it was better considering the age group. My elementary school was an experiment in moving 6th graders to the middle school. It was part of the class that never finished elementary. My middle school was then the experiment for moving 9th graders to high school, which was part of the class that never finished middle school. I dropped out of high school because it was BS, got perfect marks on my GED a month later, and I was a depressed little gremlin. Finally get my crap together, go back to college, honor roll and all that jazz to have a fancy tassel and medal when I walk. Boom. COVID senior year. The graduation ceremony is alone in an empty stadium. All the major milestones of education are robbed by outside factors except high school. Story 6. My social battery. I'm so drained all the time, I never want to do anything outside of work, even when it's something I previously enjoyed. I'd rather stay home. I would say socialization in general. People have forgotten how to behave in public. Also, we're all low-key terrified of life outside, I think. I have a side job as a bartender. The crowd is much less social now than it was before COVID. I think this is going to have terrible consequences for society. People are so isolated already. Many of us work from home or are hybrid, so we don't get to know our coworkers like we used to, which is a big part of socializing as an adult. Everyone is less willing to go out, so we don't see the friends we do have as much as we used to. Humans need human interaction. Technology is convenient, but this isn't enough. Yup, been working with my current boss since last January, and I've seen him in person once. Haven't met the rest of my team face to face either. COVID really hurt the young folk as well. So much harder to meet peers when they might not come in every day or week. Or if they do, it might not be consistent. I was listening to a podcast about this a few weeks ago. They were saying it's not only detrimental to the social aspect of work, but it's also detrimental to young employees' ability to rise. They aren't getting the same level of development that naturally happens when working with others. Also, your boss doesn't know you that well, so who is going to suggest you for promotion? I believe they also said psychologically supervisors don't perceive you as working as hard when they can't actually see you working. I lost a good friend to this. She never wants to leave home anymore and never comes to visit or wants anyone to visit her. I feel like society forcing homebodies to get out once in a while, through whatever mechanism, was good for friendships. Once we all got used to staying indoors, a lot of people never went out again. I just realized that when I started going back out, how much people freaking suck. It's like when you go without sugary treats for a long time and your taste buds get hypersensitive. All of a sudden, you take a bite of that public tomfoolery and you're like, this chocolate-covered a-hole BS is overwhelmingly strong for me. I hope your friend at least finds time to chill with you, even if it's just one-on-one or around your house. Losing friends sucks. Story 7. It really feels like corporations have an even stronger grip on the United States than ever. We are really being squeezed in every way, and it's because our government is so heavily lobbied and controlled by corporations. Pay rate, job security, benefits, all of these things seem to be getting objectively worse or stagnating at best. It's like COVID killed the middle class of businesses. Many either thrived or closed, and if they thrived, it was through over-the-top practices that they had to do to survive, that they're not letting go now that things are normal. And the tech expectations and the expectations of their shareholders not changing after the COVID bump is vicious. It's making tech a more miserable industry than it already was, because our economy is based on unlimited growth, despite that clearly being nonsensical and unsustainable, and because tech saw a lot of that delicious growth when everyone threw their money at online content instead of restaurants. Tech companies have become like cartoon villain greedy and are either killing their employees via burnout or aggressively offshoring jobs. Most of the non-giants will likely die because of it. The company I just left was certainly circling the drain. I remember noticing how the "must always make a bigger profit than the year before" mantra was the default, and immediately figuring that was completely unsustainable when reading about food companies in 2019 or so. And then, with the tech bubbles during COVID and then bursting a couple of years later, it's like it doesn't take a lot to notice how bad of an idea it all is. And yet we're all at the mercy of it, both as employees and consumers. For if you make $3 billion one year and then $2.9 billion the next year, that shouldn't be a catastrophic failure because 5 to 10 people in a room are expected to make more money. Cutting costs on your product or service doesn't mean you're making a bigger profit, honestly. They don't care. Aggravating. Part of that is the management consulting, cult-style private equity buying up everything and squeezing. We need antitrust at the funding route level, especially when foreign sovereign wealth-backed private equity-fronted groups are involved. We also need to limit autocratic freedom in markets. Market systems and open constitutional democratic republics should benefit one another and make autocratic systems change to invest here or get investments. Much of the pain comes from the money autocratic systems have to squeeze through near serfdom-like policies. If only we would finally start taking advantage of and using the internet, a tool that effectively grants us all telepathy to organize mass protests and targeted strikes. We could take down our corporate oligarchs and change our lives for the better overnight. Sadly, we only use it to bitch and moan and argue and complain about everything. The solution is literally in our hands. Story 8. The mental well-being of like 65% of citizens. Yeah, I've had this conversation so many times with so many different people. Everyone seems to agree that the pandemic dialed everyone's level of crazy up by like 5 to 15%. The people who were 0% crazy before are still getting by fine, but it pushed some previously okay-ish people to the edge and was enough to tip a really large percentage of the population over from barely getting by to not getting by at all. A lot of people's mental stability was held together by duct tape before COVID and fell to pieces after. And then it was race riots, then inflation, then Ukraine, Gaza. Stuff just keeps getting weirder, and there hasn't been time to re-duct tape. I will say that with each one of those things I paid less attention progressively. I think I just couldn't take being stressed out about something I can't control. I was really outraged by everything in 2020, then less engaged in Ukraine, now pretty much ignoring the Middle East. Also, I'm Jewish, so trying to keep my head above water. I almost forgot it was an election year a few days ago. Thanks to lockdowns, people got more plugged into the internet because it gave them live content updates and are even more perpetually online than before. Stuff that doesn't affect them in the slightest is now the worst thing ever, and they can't stop thinking about it. I recall specifically checking daily COVID numbers, reading every article and watching every video I could. Then a few months unplugged from it all, deleted my Facebook, deleted my Reddit account, stopped checking all the stats daily, and just lived my life. Yes, in a similar vein to how we in the West were permanently changed by 9/11, prior to that life was different, and people were happier. Then a big horrible event happened and dialed up the crazy, permanently ruining society in the process. Young people have absolutely no understanding of what life was like before. If you're young now, then in 20 years you'll be able to tell kids they don't understand how life was, like pre-pandemic. I also want to put out the situation of having the majority of socialization being from online interactions. Obviously, being online was huge before, but with the pandemic, it really took a large amount of face-to-face exposure completely out of the equation. With all things online now, even standard social settings have gone out. Streaming services have killed the movie theaters and the last video stores. Online delivery services have killed the malls and damaged many retail outlets, and even grocery stores have delivery options. I think the effects of this are not fully acknowledged, but it will be seen more as the younger generation grows up. This is what is really going to drive the pre/post-pandemic divide. Like 15 years ago, the teachers I know were talking about how badly the rise of tablets and smartphones was going to affect the studying, socialization, and focusing skills of the students, and they were 100% right. Story 9. Cheap food. The supply chain either still hasn't stabilized, or it has and we are being taken advantage of. I was working in grocery analytics at the time, and yes, we are being taken advantage of. Retail prices went up many multiples of the wholesale cost increase in 2020 and 2021, and the trend has continued each year. Considering all of these restaurants and grocery chains have been experiencing record profits, whereas most families are spending more on groceries without their household incomes increasing, it's very clear that these billionaires are just bending us over and having their way with us. It's inflation. The Fed quadrupled the money supply within a year and a half. It's not going away. It's always going to be there. Get used to the new normal. Yep. All those COVID relief payments and newly printed money got funneled to large asset managers and hedge funds. Stocks momentarily crashed once COVID became a thing, then the Fed printed an absolute ton of money and sent it to people as relief payments. Ordinary people saw an opportunity to take advantage of the market crash. So they jumped in, stock prices began rising, and they just kept rising and rising to unprecedented, astronomical levels as more and more people with no idea what they were doing jumped in because stocks only go up. A year or so later came the rug pull and the market fell back down to reality as the big boys sold many of their holdings at the top for outrageous profits, which caused a mass sell-off. After the mass sell-off, when retail traders were in a state of panic, the big boys used their previous profits to buy up all the cheap shares so the cycle would repeat itself again. Now the rich have all the profits from selling at the top and they still have all of their shares, and the plebs are left with nothing but higher prices for everything. That's true, but it's only part of it. With COVID lockdowns, small businesses got absolutely smashed, so even though big businesses were being bailed out by the government, they were also gobbling up all of the market share at the same time. Record profits from being the only places open, as well as seeing their competition destroyed. So now we have inflation destroying the savings of the middle class, along with dead businesses destroying the middle class, plus housing prices and education. The response to COVID did more to kill the middle class in America than anything else in history. Inflation has very little to do with the supply chain. Though there were legitimate supply chain issues during the pandemic due to government authoritarianism, inflation is caused by the government printing money, and it's not going to stabilize. If it did, we would have 5-cent hamburgers at McDonald's like we did in the 60s. It's a way for the government to reduce the value of their debts and steal money from citizens without raising taxes. Without money printing, we would also no longer have forever wars, since the government would need to raise taxes to pay for them. The last time that happened was World War I, with the introduction of the income tax, which we were told was a temporary measure to pay for the war. None of the neocon nation-building projects in the Middle East would have ever gotten off the ground if the government was forced to raise taxes and/or cut spending to pay for them. Story 10. Businesses, cleanliness, and hours. Go to some local box store like Target, walk around and see just how trashy it looks now. Clothes on the floor because they don't have enough staff to pick them up. Half-empty shelves. It's like they're in a perpetual state of closing down. Also, lots of late-night stores and restaurants cut hours and never returned them. There's nowhere for a night owl to shop at a grocery store near me anymore. Used to have a 24-hour grocery, but now they close at 10 or something. I went to my local JCPenney a few weeks ago for the first time in a long time and could not believe how awful it looked. I honestly thought I had walked into an abandoned, looted, and vandalized store. It seemed like there were only 1 or 2 people working in the entire place too, and they looked exhausted. Yeah, because it's all about cutting costs and building profits, and they know those 2 people need their jobs so that they can exploit them. And then people say no one wants to work. We need to flip that saying to no one wants to hire enough people anymore. A lot of big box companies, especially in the worst of 2020, realized that the customer and shopping experience can absolutely tank because they know people will still just get the item they came in for. Gotta think how a lot of these places essentially run on a revolving door of part-timers, and for all you know, the disgruntled employee who spit in your face might not even be back until a week, and on a completely different shift. The whole system is flimsy. I nearly laughed my ass off whenever that CVS commercial plays where they make it seem like the most staffed place ever, because I feel like it's been ages since there's actually a situation of a crew of more than 3 to 4 people excluding pharmacy. Oh, we don't have that commercial here, but I know exactly what you mean. Yes, we are just overflowing with knowledgeable, kind staff who just can't wait to service you in our totally clean store with stocked shelves. Or the car commercials, where there are no other cars on the road and everything is relaxing instead of the reality of total wanker drivers everywhere. I worked at Target before and during the pandemic and quit in 2022 because my mental health was broken. The way we were treated by customers and the ridiculous standards and demands higher-ups were making of me in my department just became way too much. Pretty much everyone I knew in my store from before the pandemic left for similar reasons. Story 11. I feel like the stuff I do for money has come to feel so meaningless. I press buttons and guide other people on pressing those buttons, so some other people can print the packaging. Everything's so big, a business needs 25 other businesses to survive. We've created millions of problems to sell made-up solutions. I don't think I'm alone in this. You're not alone. The world certainly feels more corporatized than before. Everything you do, everywhere you go, is some big corporation trying to sell you one or more things. A lot of which you don't really need but will feel like you need, or at least should have by the time they're done with you. And as for the people that work in those corporations, they increasingly see the mindlessness of what they're doing because we're all starting to realize how much BS is being sold to the world that isn't needed. The vast majority of us are just cogs in some corporate machine that is increasingly becoming more and more designed for the sole purpose of chewing people up, digesting their money, and spitting everything else out. I think quarantine taught me that so many of the things and activities that I considered essential really aren't. I'm seeing ads differently now, like why do I need a belt that fastens differently when I've got belts that work fine? If I don't see that concert, am I less happy? Especially with Live Nation/Ticketmaster brutalizing the fans' wallets and not enriching the artists. Ultra-rich buying yachts and shooting themselves into space. It's really demoralizing. I think automation and improvements to supply chains coupled with a decreased demand in jobs, considered to be manual labor, farming, mining, factory work, contribute heavily to our general outlook on life in the developed world. At the same time, we are also encouraging our children to go to college to the point where it's becoming the norm to have a college degree rather than the exception. Logically, as a society, we should be working fewer hours and days due to these improvements in technology. But for whatever reason, we are still working just as much as people did 50 years ago, when factory work and manual labor were not only much more common, but was actually needed. The world's population has only increased since then, but we are still able to, mostly, keep up with growing enough food, producing enough goods, and constructing enough homes and building for our societies with fewer people doing these jobs. My point is that the vast majority of the jobs we do now, specifically office work, are probably not really needed. I think individually, we ask ourselves, what's the point of even going to work when it's so unfulfilling? Growing up, we were told that we were special and that we could do anything we put our minds to. And while this may have been done with good intentions, the reality is that most of us are not actually special. And we can't actually do what we want unless we were born into money or privilege, or we somehow got lucky. Technology has advanced significantly faster in the past 50 years than it ever has in all of human history. There really is no other point in time that compares or even comes close. At the same time, most of our leaders, at least in the US, are much older than they should be and were born into a completely different world than we live in now. While having older leaders is not ideal for obvious reasons, cognitive decline and poorer health and energy, it's even more problematic because of how fast our technology has advanced in such a short amount of time. Leaders 1,000 years ago have seen a few improvements over the course of their lives, but nothing like we've seen now. Our leaders are clearly out of touch and way over their heads on a lot of issues, and it's extremely frustrating when we already have the blueprints in place to essentially make our society into a utopia. Altogether, this has made a lot of us, including myself, pretty nihilistic and even depressed. We should be working fewer hours and days, and we should start focusing on finding actual meaning to our lives as a whole. We may never actually find a true meaning, but I know this isn't it. It's bad enough that people stuck working meaningless jobs lose their sense of purpose, but the worst of it, the real travesty of the human soul, is that people working meaningless jobs also have to live, breathe, and go to work every day with the full burden of stress of knowing that their jobs are the most disposable. We have no purpose in our jobs, and a significant number of us are only one bad fiscal quarter away from being altogether jobless. How could anyone ever expect a soul to flourish under such dire circumstances? Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.